Thanks so much to all my patrons. Join now to help support the channel and help pick the books that I review. Link in the description. Welcome back, everybody, to another edition of my top 100 list of the best fantasy novels of all time. Today, we're going to be going through number 90 to 81. If you want to watch the previous video in this series, then click right up here and you can catch up before you watch this one. So let's jump right into it with number 90, and that is The Black Company. This is part of the Black Company series by Glenn Cook, obviously the first book in the series, and this was written in 1984. You'll find often in my channel that I give unintentional bonus points often to first books in a series and last books in a series. Something about them just strikes me in this nostalgic kind of way when I think back to them. But the reason that the Black Company is on this list in my top 100 is not for nostalgia, because I truly believe that the first book is something a little bit more special than a large majority of the other books in the series. Now, I love the series. It's one of my all-time favorite series, and I would plead anybody that's into darker fantasy or into something like a Malazan to jump into it and try it out, because it is something special. But this first book, it did such a good job at setting the stage and setting the vibe right. This story in general is about this mercenary company that is called the Black Company, and they take contracts from the highest bidder. And as the series starts out, their employer is kind of like a Wicked Witch of the West type of character. And obviously it's different than that, but it feels like that from the evil sorceress woman that doesn't appear to have any sort of like moral good side to her. Now, things get more complex as the series goes along, but in the first book, that's where it starts. And you start to see the eventual end goal that this initial trilogy is going to try to march towards. But the vibe is it feels darker than the other ones. It feels less kind of plot driven than the other ones. And now oftentimes I might say something like, oh, it's not as plot driven. That would be a really negative thing. Here it's not, because for me, what really stood out to me was these characters getting to interact, learning more about them and finding out their motivations, trying to figure out the mystery of why this company is who they are, and trying to understand and learn this very unique writing style that Glenn Cook employs. What he does here, and something that I've never experienced since then, is he writes things from the first-person perspective in a diary format. So you have this person in this series, it's called the Analyst. It's one of the jobs of the mercenary company, a very important job. Not the leader of the mercenary company, but the one who writes down everything that happens, like the biographer. But it's called the Analyst. And their job for hundreds of years has been to record the history of the Black Company. Now, at some point, these records have been lost. And that's part of the mystery of the story, is where did this company come from? How do they figure out their roots? Why did they get lost? But it also is like, this is the tradition of the company, and dang it, we're going to stick to it. But what's special about it is you get to read things in the voice of the author, not Glenn Cook, but in the voice of the person with intense bias that decides to write the history down. That is cool. That is really, really cool in an old fantasy kind of setting. You know, this is something, I've said it before, I think I said it in the previous video, but it reminds me of reading some of those old like Vietnam War diary type books, if you're into old kind of history stuff, set in a fantastical setting with magic and wizards and dark arts, and it's cool. I thoroughly also loved understanding the character relationships with each other. I mean, you've got these two mages in this company that absolutely hate each other, and they go through these intense moments of essentially trying to kill each other using magic. But you also get that sense that it's like one of those sibling rivalry type things where they actually do kind of love each other, and that's the way they express their love. It's really cool, really fun, awesome dialogue, really, really unique writing, and it's a must-read for the genre if you like anything a little bit with a darker tone. So let's move on to number 89, and this is Royal Assassin. This is the second book in the realm of the Elderlings by Robin Hobb, and this was published in 1996. So I I have the most positive memories of reading The Realm of the Elderlings. In particular, reading about this character Fitz. Now, The Realm of the Elderlings is a 16-book series. And don't let that kind of be daunting to you if you're ever thinking about getting into this, because they're really broken up into 4 different trilogies in one quartet, or what's the other name for it? A 4-book series. And that is the second to last series. Second to last? Yeah, second to last series is the 4-book one. But this is the second book in a trilogy, basically, and they can be read by themselves. You don't want to read them out of order, although you can read the second trilogy first if you want. You'll lose out on a cool little moment where you see a character show up and you understand who they are, and it really has this cool impact that you would just be totally oblivious to if you didn't. But that's it. You can totally read it first if you want. I don't know that a ton of people are going to say that, but let's be real here. You can totally do it. But this is the second one in this series. And by this point in the series, you've understood who this character Fitz is. You understand the magical powers that Fitz has. And they're not intensely over the top. They're some of the more muted fantasy powers for a protagonist of a story that I've ever read. I mean, they're helpful, but he doesn't even know how to master them. And even if he does, you get the sense that it's not going to be world-changing. Because the story is not a story about magic. It exists. This is a story about human growth. It's a story about loss. It's a story about redemption. It's a story about trying to find who you are as a person when everything is going against you. And that really resonated with me. Not because I feel like I've had to do that in my own personal life, but because of the intense uniqueness that this story provides. That, what I just described, is not something that exists in fantasy. In fantasy, you have these stories of these ultra protagonists who take on the world. They're almost always going to win. Or you have the total antithesis of that, where you have these dark series where everything is morally gray, and a lot of superpower stuff going on. This one is just down to the real life angle of things. And that's really cool. Now, this series is not going to be for everybody. Most certainly not, because it's so slow. But if you like it, the slow is what makes it special, because you just get these real human emotions. It's the best character writing in all of fantasy. In the second book in particular, I found it to be the best of the initial trilogy, because you now understood the character. You got all this kind of slow build up out of the way, and you got to put a little bit more pedal to the metal. Now, granted, it's pedal to the metal in the Realm of the Elderlings, which is still pretty dang slow. But you have these major events going on, and you feel like the first book was really just all of a major setup for this next one to be able to come in and do its thing. Now, clearly it's a trilogy. I found the third book in this trilogy to be, at least when I read it the first time, like the weakest of the 16 books, which can put a lot of people off. But then I found the next trilogy, and you're going to hear about all 3 of those books later on, to be some of the best books that I've ever read. So that's cool. Robin Hobb let me down, and then she totally served it up on the next one. But yeah, this is a wonderful series. Check it out. Just make sure you have a box of tissues next to you, because unless you just have no heart, you're definitely going to be utilizing those to a pretty big extent. So book number 88 is Knife of Dreams. This is the, 11th book? 12th book? Something like that, in the Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan. This was published in 2005. Now, Knife of Dreams is just an absolutely wonderful book by Robert Jordan. After a series of some comparatively bland entries into the Wheel of Time. And while it's widely accepted in the Wheel of Time community that this book is much better than the last few, I was not quite prepared for how great this book truly was until I read it. Now, the 3 books that preceded this, I think there's some debate whether it's 3 or 4. I believe it's 3. Maybe there's no debate. Maybe everyone thinks it's 3. Is called The Slog. And what they mean by that is you had these books that all had a relatively similar structure to them. You had them pretty isolated. You had a very easy beginning, middle, and end to them. By the end of the book, they were resolving many things that were happening in the beginning of it. Obviously, there's some overarching themes going on and these threads that are tying everything together, but you felt like you finished a book and it had this major explosion of events happen, this kind of classic Brandon Sanderson-esque type thing, which is clearly where he kind of learned it from. Considering he was a massive fan of the series and ended up finishing the series after Robert Jordan died. And you got these 3 books that didn't have that. It felt like it was just too much being thrown onto the plate. You had a lot of chapters dealing with these characters going to different locations. You're kind of pleading for the author to bring them all back together at some point, or at least bring some of them back together so we can merge some of these plots. Don't have so many chapters spending time with one person while everything else is just kind of like, standing on the side of the road. And then by the end of the book, you just kind of feel like you were let down. Now, I happen to enjoy those kind of, the slog books, but they were noticeably worse than the other ones. And it probably would have been horrifically bad if you finished one of those slog books and you couldn't just pick out the next one when they were coming out. You had to go wait a year or two for the next one to come out. That would have been horrible. For somebody like me who read them after this whole series is completed, it was easy to say, okay, that's done. Let me go pick up the next one. I'll get through this. But yeah, this is where everything gets fixed because, this book concluded so many plot threads that have been sitting out there for a while. And the delayed gratification that came from finally being able to see everything come together was truly amazing and special. And it made it so much better than the normal book, where you got the setup and then the conclusion all within one book. For everything to be set up over multiple books, to then knock this one out of the park and close up so many loops. It's awesome. It is so awesome. And it makes looking back on those slog books so much more enjoyable. And it makes me want to go back and read them even more because I know I have this faith that everything's going to kind of come together in this one. Now, I can't go into detail about what these conclusions were or even what they pertain to, as I don't want to spoil anything for future readers. But rest assured, they are extremely satisfying. Now, for any readers who are not quite sure if they want to dive through the slog of a few books that are a noticeable downgrade from the rest of the books, rest assured that the setup is worth it. And now that we live in a time where all these books are already released and you don't have to wait for the next book to come out, it is so worth the wait. Now, ultimately finishing this book was rather bittersweet. Now, on one hand, this book is a return to greatness for a series that had been suffering from a lack of pace in the last few books. And on the other hand, it's quite sad to realize that someone who I had finished the last of the books from, someone that I recognized once I finished these as one of my favorite authors, ends up passing away, and that this was the final book that they read. And I knew that going in. And that is sad that you know that you're finally done and you'll never be able to read a newer book from an author. And while I had every bit of faith at the time that Brandon Sanderson would knock the last few books out of the park, which he did, we'll hear about all 3 of those later on, it's disappointing nonetheless that it had to be finished by a different author. So bravo, Robert Jordan. Thank you for all the wonderful memories and absolutely wonderful job getting this book out and having this be your final one. It was absolutely worth it and just an absolute gem of a book. So, to happier things. Let's move on to number 87, and this is Men at Arms. This is one of the Discworld books. There's 50 plus of them. I have no idea which one. But it is the second of the City Watch books. This is written by Terry Pratchett, and it was published in 1993. So, Discworld, it is overwhelming because there's 50 plus books. However, it shouldn't be overwhelming because they are short. They're easy reads. You can breeze through them. They're a few hundred pages or so, which is quite small for a fantasy book. That might be kind of big for, a sane reader, but we're not. We read big books. But the series is also divided up into different strands where there's like 5 or 6 different kind of mini series going on within it that you want to read in order. And so you can kind of think of these not as like 50 books, but as like, 8 to 10 or so. And that's a lot more manageable. So this is the second one in the City Watch series. The City Watch series is a series about the night watch of this city of Ankh-Morpork. I don't know how to say it. And I know how to read it. Didn't listen to the audiobooks. But the city is a little bit lawless, and especially at night, where this night watch walks around basically doing nothing. and just telling everybody that it's safe, even though it's clearly not. And loudly exclaiming where they are and who they are so the criminals can like stay away from them. So nobody, ends up getting hurt on either side. This is the second book in this little series. The first book, which may be my favorite Discworld book, and probably the funniest book I've ever read, dealt with a very small cast of characters. It dealt with like 4 main characters. Now in this one, that at the tail end of the first book, the City Watch ends up doing something really cool and awesome, and they get recognized by the patrician of the city for doing a good job, and they get a lot of funding to expand the City Watch. And in this one, they do. So they end up hiring a bunch of people. And on its own, that is really cool because you get a lot more time with these character interactions and learning about more people. And, Terry Pratchett is a genius at writing compelling characters and funny characters. So getting more people into the mix that can play off each other is only a really good thing. Just a really good thing. So, yeah, I will always think of this one as the moment when the City Watch expands and have really positive memories from that. Now, fans of fantasy or just fans of laughing need to stop what they're doing and read both this book and the predecessor, Guards. I really can't remember ever reading books before that have not only made me have a fixed smile on my face the entire time I read, like literally you can't stop smiling, but legitimately laughing out loud many times. Now, usually funny books that I've read end up giving me light chuckles. But I was nearly in tears multiple times to the point where my wife wondered if I was going to be okay. That's the sign of a really funny book, right? Now, Pratchett's stories are almost always good to great, but he really shines with his character dialogue. And so this whole new cast of characters added to the main cast, they're just such wonderful additions that play off each other so well. The Watch has to recruit more members, and I think part of it is that there's like this affirmative action initiative that goes on, so they have to bring on like a dwarf and a troll and a werewolf. Now, Discworld books are very famous for doing parodies over usually multiple things within the same book. So with affirmative action, it's so fun to read about it in a fantasy setting where their version of affirmative action is not the color of your skin, but the class of fantasy creature that you are. That's awesome. But one of the main characters doesn't know the werewolf is a werewolf and thinks that they've been recruited due to being a female. That is so funny on its face, and to see it all play out is just so awesome. It's truly, truly genius level writing. Discworld is an amazing series, but the books can be kind of hit or miss. Not only the books themselves, but the sub-series that are contained with them. I mean, there's a lot of disagreement between Discworld fans on which series is the best, but by far the largest opinion is that the City Watch novels are by far the best, which is what this book is. So if you haven't read Discworld before, do yourself a favor and start with this branch of the books to really get the hooks in you before you move on to the next ones, and you will not regret it. All right, so moving to number 86, and this is Malice. This is the first book in the Faithful and the Fallen series by John Gwynne, and this was published in 2012. You'll hear me talking a lot about John Gwynne on this channel because he's one of the very, very few authors where literally every single book that he writes I love. He has written, unless he's written more books that I don't know about, but he's written 9 books so far. I've given 8 of them 5 out of 5s, and 1 of them a 4.5 out of 5. That is a ludicrous record for me to be able to look at an author. And one of the primary reasons that he will forever go down, unless he just totally turns a weird path and starts writing some horrific, fantasy romance stories or something. But he'll always, be looked at as one of the top very small handful of authors to me. Malice starts out this epic fantasy story of his that's set in this kind of classic medieval type setting, with, the story starting off in a little village with a boy who realizes that he might be a little more powerful than he initially thought he was. You've read hundreds of these stories before, or of hundreds of them. It's not a unique kind of plot. But where it does end up getting unique is as we get further along and you start to realize that we're going to be getting different points of view here from people on multiple sides of this conflict. Now, this is something that is done, somewhat frequently, not super frequently, I love it when that happens. But you also get this amazing play off of religion. Now, you'll find religion in a lot of fantasy stories. But I don't know that I've read a story that, not just in this one, but this whole 4-book series of The Faithful and the Fallen, that played with it in a more interesting way, that just gripped me from start to finish. I mean, it is really, really cool what Gwen is able to accomplish here and setting the stage. He also does this really cool thing where you meet these characters and you start to think about them in a different light as the story goes along. And all of the characters get introduced and you're like, oh, these are all, people that are trying their best. They have good motivations. I like them. And multiple of the characters as the story goes along start to take a different path, even in this one book. And I love watching that kind of Darth Vader type plot thread go on. It would be kind of like, watching episode 1 of Star Wars, if it was good, and seeing that slowly unravel without knowing that it's going to happen. And that's really cool. I mean, now, that may seem like a spoiler. It's not. I mean, you'll see it right away. But it's fun watching this character, and multiple characters for that matter, slowly start changing. And you're realizing they're changing before they do. And that's really fun. So the writing here also... is very well done. The prose isn't anything to write home about. But the battle sequences, of which all of the books that ever John Gwynne's going to write, and for now into the future, are going to feature large-scale battles. And it's something that Gwynne is not just good at, not just great at, but the best at. He has an ability to write battle sequences so vividly perfect that you just can't help but sit back and visualize and picture every single little piece on the board. How it's going on. It's just a perfect ability to write. Now, I don't visualize the books that I read to the extent that a lot of other readers do. There's the spectrum of how much do you, picture the characters and what they're wearing and their eye color and what the room looks like. And I've never been that kind of reader. Now, I do take it in. I get these kind of pictures of things, but it's a little vaguer to me in my head. But not with Gwen. With Gwen, everything is perfectly pictured. And it's not because he takes this painstaking detail to write out everything, but the info that he does give you is just so perfectly delivered that you just can't help that everything kind of makes sense. So yeah, John Gwynne, awesome. This book, awesome. This series, awesome. Check it out. Okay, so let's move to number 85. And this is A Feast for Crows. This is the 4th book in A Song of Ice and Fire by George R.R. Martin, and this was published in 2005. Now, I imagine that you're not going to see a ton of people putting something on a list like this together, although I don't know if you're going to see a lot of people making a top 100 list in the first place, so I guess that's a fair statement. You won't really see any of these. But when you hear people talk about A Song of Ice and Fire in their favorite books, I think about 95 to 98% of the time, you're going to have somebody say that the 4th book is the weakest. I agree. I do agree. However, when you have a series that's so incredible, having the worst book in the series might not really be that bad of a thing. And I think because I've read this story 3 times, I've come to appreciate it a lot more from then, because when you're reading it for the first time, it is jarring. It's strange because for whatever reason, I never really looked into it, but the author decided to publish the 4th and 5th books very back to back, and they cover a different set of characters. So in the first 3 books, what you had was these point of views that it would follow, and they would jump between them. But in this 4th and 5th book, you have half of the POVs in the 4th one and half of them in the 5th one, and the stories are running simultaneously. So if you wanted to, there's lists out there that show you how to read the 4th and 5th books chronologically, and it's read a chapter from this book, then this one, then this one, then this one, and it's not perfectly lined up. Read 2 from here, read 3 from here, and that's how you can do it chronologically to make the 4th and 5th books combined to be something even more special. Now, I'm not going to rank this with the 4th and 5th combined, because they're not combined. If they were, this would be way higher than 85, but it's not. But yeah, I'm such a huge fan of A Song of Ice and Fire, as so many people are. I just have these intensely positive feelings from this entire series. I was obsessed with it for a long time, And I wouldn't say obsessed with it because I read so many different fantasy stories that I can't really be obsessed with any one thing. Even 𝐒𝐿𝐴𝐼𝐼, which is my favorite series, I've only read it once. I don't have time. I'm trying to read a bunch of different things and catch up to all these wonderful stories that have come out since before I started reading fantasy. But this one had a special place in my heart for a really long time because it got me back into fantasy. Now, I read fantasy as a kid. I took a large break through high school and college when I was had to read books for school. And I didn't find any enjoyment out of reading books for pleasure because I was doing so much for school. But when the show came out, I watched one episode. I said, this is awesome. No more show for me. Let me go read the books. I'll come back to the show when I'm done. And I just became hooked. And I thought there was no other fantasy story that would ever exist that could be like this, so I didn't read any others. I made a mistake. I'm sorry, myself. I messed up. But yeah, this stuff is awesome. And I don't know, if you've already watched the show and you're like, okay, I already saw it, I don't need to read the books. Yeah, you messed up. You messed up, but luckily you can fix that by going and reading the first one right now. All right, moving to number 84, and it is The Captain. This is the first book in the series The Last Horizon by Will White, and this was published in 2023. Now, Will White is very popularly known as the author of the Cradle series, which was a 12-book series that just completed back in 2013. 23. Got 10 years off that. But yeah, he completed it last year. And it was, it's kind of known as the de facto starting place that you should be reading progression fantasy stories. Progression fantasy kind of defined as characters, video game style, getting more powerful over time. And it's very, very addicting. But he decided to do something new in this one, and nobody was really sure where he was going to go with this or if it would be a good idea. Now, I strongly suspect, based on the reviews, not necessarily being bad, but the quantity of reviews not being anywhere close to what Cradle was at for this new series, The Last Horizon, that people don't like it as much and aren't as hyped about it. I sure am. I honestly think that The Last Horizon, even 2 books in, is in a better place than Cradle was. I kind of already like it more than I liked Cradle, which is crazy because I loved Cradle. This series takes a different direction than the progression fantasy thing, has some aspects to it, but the characters start this series as intensely powerful. Within the first chapter. And it's one of the best first chapters I've ever read. Go check it out. Even if you don't plan on reading the series, go find one of these books at the library or figure out a way to get your hands on one and just read the first chapter. It is mind-blowingly pedal to the metal, all gas, no brakes. It is amazing. And it's about this wizard who goes through this ritual where there's this thing there where each wizard can have one speciality, and you cannot have more. That's totally doesn't make sense. But he does this crazy expensive ritual where he can relive his life 7 or 8 different times and imbue all those different lives into him, so that he is like a 7 or 8 times wizard. That's already lived these memories so many different times, so he knows a bunch of people that don't know that he knows them because he met them in a different timeline. And he ends up getting control of this ship, The Last Horizon, which is this relic of the past, this magic ship. And once he gets it, the ship needs all different crew members, so he's the captain. But it needs these 5 or 6 different crew members to make the ship work at its maximum capabilities. So it's very limited in power until it gets an engineer and, a commander and these different aspects of the ship. And the series is going to be about each book going around and getting one more of the crew. And it's such a fun concept where the crew he's picking up is being picked up because they're the strongest. So it's just strong people recruiting strong people to fight these evil forces that are bigger than life. And it's just such a different aspect than I see. So often I read stories where people start on the bottom and they work up. They fight these fights of people that are middling in strength until they get to the big baddie at the end, and they're so powerful enough they can finally do it. In this one, it's no, from the first book, you're going up against the strongest possible enemies because you are the strongest possible protagonists. Fun stuff. Awesome twist on the genre. Great job, Will White. Can't wait to read the rest of your stuff. Moving to number 83, and this is A Time of Blood. This is in the Of Blood and Bone series by John Gwynne. This was published in 2019, and it is the second book in the series. So earlier in this video, we talked about The Faithful and the Fallen. The Faithful and the Fallen is set in the Banished Lands, is the location of the books, and it is a 4-book series. Now, less popularly, after Gwynne published that 4-book series, he published a trilogy called Of Blood and Bone that takes place on the same planet, in the same locations, with some of the same characters, because this is a fantasy series and some people can live a long time. But like 150 years later, and it deals with similar type events. Now, the first book, I felt like had a lot of problems with it. It's not going to show up on this list. I still loved it, but not as much. It's the one book I gave a 4.5. But it was, it felt like it was just going to be a rehash of the first, the first 4 books, where it was like, oh wow, okay, a new enemy that is really similar to the last one, and we got to defeat him in a really similar way. But it starts to do its own thing, and the second book is where it's at. The second book is where it finally turns into its own thing and shoots off and made me obsessed with it again. I will forever remember the major battle sequences that go on here, because John Gwynne is like the best in the world at that. And it's just really good stuff. I'm disappointed in you, in particular you, for not reading this trilogy. And I know you didn't read it because very, very, very few people have read it. And hey, look, you've probably read Faithful and the Fallen, right? Are you the person that has done this? That has abandoned John Gwynne like this, our boy John Gwynne? And it's frustrating that you look at like the Goodreads ratings and the Amazon ratings, and not like the star ratings, but like the amount of people rating them, just like the gross quantity of them. And it is just painfully short of those other 4 books. I don't get it. Were they not marketed right? Were people over it? Were they like, okay, we got an ending, we don't need to keep going? What am I missing? Because these books are awesome. And they're everything that people would like about the first ones, they would like about these as well. So if you find yourself in that boat of, I read the first, I haven't heard great things about this one, let's just move on to Bloodshorn Saga, his newer series that he's writing now, which is awesome, by the way, and you'll hear about both those books later on, then you've messed up, and you need to go back and read them. You owe it to yourself. And you know what? If you're not going to do it yourself, do it for me. And it'll make me happy. All right, moving on. Number 82 is Best Served Cold. This is the first standalone in the First Law series by Jill Abercrombie, published in 2009, and being turned into a movie, which is cool. I'll talk about that in a second. But so the First Law is a 9-book series, 10 if you include the short story collection, but it has a trilogy, and then 3 standalones, and then another trilogy. And the standalones can really just be read on their own. They don't have to be read in a particular order. They kind of do. But they're not strongly connected to each other. They're not strongly connected to the other books in the series. They are connected, but yeah, they're definitely standalone books. And they all do something very different. And this one in particular, this is a revenge story, but also mixed in with like an Ocean's 11 type story, which is cool, which is really cool, because I don't read enough of those type stories in a fantasy genre. You find out in the first chapter that this main character, Monza Mikado, has been wronged in some major way, and now she's going to go kill everybody that wronged her. And the book promises you right at the beginning that she's going to systematically go through over the course of 5 or 6 chapters per person, and start picking off these bad guys one by one in really inventive ways. And they're going to keep getting harder and harder to take out. And that's a really fun concept for a book. And that's kind of the way the book goes. Now, in Abercrombie style, that things get twisted around, revelations happen, it doesn't go the way you think it would. And that's not just Abercrombie, that's fantasy in general. But Abercrombie's, that's his hallmark. And you never really know what to expect here. It's also a darker, grittier world where everybody's kind of gray. Even the main character is not a good person. There's no good people in these stories. Usually you'll have like 1 or so side characters that can be kind of described as like good. But the one good character here is a little girl who poisons people. And a lot of people. And that's her job, to kill people. So that's the best character in this book from a morality perspective. This book did such a wonderful job at highlighting Abercrombie's strength, which is his character writing and his dialogue. It gave such a wonderful opportunity to have a smaller set of characters that are all going on this journey together, not getting split off like the rest of the First Law series, where you have, chapters over here, chapters over here, chapters over here. Maybe they'll come together, go apart. No, it's this group of people that moves from point A to point B to C to D to E, kills everybody along the way. And that's a really good way to get these bonding of these characters and to get them to talk and get them to engage. And it does a wonderful job at pulling that off. And it's because of what I just described, and that you have this group traveling together, and the only book in the entire series that really does that without jumping around too much. Now, you have some other books here that do have a relatively similar structure, but you'll be seeing both sides of it. You're jumping around at least a little bit, even though from a geography perspective, you might jump around a lot. But this one's just tailor-made for the silver screen. And I love, what I really want is for the trilogy, either the first one or the second one or both, to show up as a TV show on like HBO. That'd be awesome. That's my dream. But second to that, this is a perfect way to get the world exposed to the First Law. And I am just praying that it ends up getting actually made. Most movies that are in this stage don't end up getting made. You hear about them and then, rights get bought. People park them forever. Who knows what's going to happen, right? And maybe the fad of Game of Thrones type shows with this darker, grimdark kind of world, or will kind of go out of style, and this will never show up. God, I hope it does. God, I hope it's awesome. I'm going to be talking about it nonstop if it ends up getting produced, and I'll demand that you go watch that movie and pay money for it. All right, so let's go down to the final book in this today's video, and this is number 81, and this is Fool's Fate. This is in the realm of the Elderlings by Robin Hobb, published in 2003, and this is book 3 of The Tawny Man. Now, The Tawny Man is the third trilogy. Now, remember I talked about there being 5 different series, the third one. Also confusing. The way this series is brought up is that character Fitz I talked about earlier. He's the main character in 9 of these books. He's the main character in the first 3, and then the third 3, and then the final 3. This is the third 3. No, the first 3? Yeah, the third 3. God. Okay, let's go over this again, because this is confusing what I just said to you. You have the first trilogy. Then you have one that has nothing to do with these characters. Then you go back, you get this one. And then you get 4, which has not much to do with the other ones. And then you finally get the third one, which ties up the ending of this one, bridged into the first book of the next series. So the first 2 books in the Tawny Man are not going to show up on this list. I liked them, didn't love them. They're slow. They're slow for a Robin Hobb book, which says something. They are just, in some ways, painfully slow. But I don't mind the slowness, but the plot feels like it didn't know where it was going. In the first book, what happens is they defeat an enemy, and you're like, but there's 2 more books. I don't get it. That's weird. And it was anticlimactic. In the second book, you're like, oh, I get it now. Books end. No conclusion. Just ends. So then when you get to this one, you're like, okay, boom, we're at it. Let's do it. I know who we're going after. I know the basic plot points. Get it done. And it does. Looking back on this book, I think of it more fondly over time, which is a really cool feeling to have. I wish I could talk about the spoilers of what made this book special and the major events that happened here, but they're bigger than life. I love the antagonists to this story. I felt them so compelling. I love the major magical, fantastical elements that happen here. I can't say more than that. If you've read this, you know what I'm talking about, but really big things, which is awesome. And it wraps things up in a really fun way. And you get these huge moments involving Fitz that you've been waiting for a really long time. And it just feels like all the books have kind of been like drawing to this point, and it's just really special. I've heard a lot of people say that this trilogy is one of the weaker ones on the series. Yeah, that's true, but God, does it end well, and just awesome stuff. So that is my 10 videos for today. Thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned next week when I will be going over number 80 to 71, and we'll just keep rolling through this thing until we get to the final one. So thanks again, much appreciated, and as always, happy reading to you.
Thanks again to all my patrons, with a special shout out to my Ascendant tier and Librarian tier patrons: Anna G, CJ, Doust, Darren, Gregory, JD, Jonathan, Nathan T, Nev's Book Channel, Orthodoxia, Ron Reich, Russell, Ryan L, Sydney Baker, Tay C, Tahir, Anna, Andra, Blair, Brock, Evan, Harry B, Joe UK, Kat Mick, Michael Sugarman, Philippe, Sky, Wacky, and Zion.
Thanks for sticking to the end of this video, and if you want to watch some more content from my channel, click over here and I've got some good videos for you. Thanks so much.